What if everything you thought you knew about cannabis, every warning, every laughable stereotype, every whispered lie, was wrong? What if the very thing they told you to stay away from held the key to unlocking parts of yourself you've long forgotten? You've lived a long life. You've seen trends come and go. You've watched the world turn on its axis, shedding its skin again and again. But there's one thing they never wanted you to know. Especially someone like you, someone with years behind his back, with wisdom carved into his bones. Someone who remembers when silence was demanded and questioning meant trouble. They never told you the plant had a voice. And it wasn't saying, "Get high," it was whispering, "Wake up." You remember a time when cannabis was just dope, a dirty word, associated with long hair, bad choices, and worse neighborhoods. Maybe you saw it ruin a few folks. Maybe you stayed away out of respect for the rules. Or maybe you used it once, a lifetime ago, and chalked it up to a mistake. But no one ever sat you down and told you that buried beneath the smoke and the jokes was a sacred history so old it predates most religions. They never told you that ancient Egyptian priests used cannabis to speak with their gods. That Hindu ascetics sipped it not to escape but to dissolve their egos. They didn't want you to know that the brain has specific receptors built to receive cannabis compounds, receptors that don't exist for alcohol or caffeine. They didn't want you to know that your body was, quite literally, made to commune with this plant. And maybe the reason they didn't tell you is because they were afraid of what you'd see once you did. You've earned your gray hair. You've fought your battles. You've survived years most men didn't. But when was the last time you saw the world with new eyes? When was the last time you felt like something ancient and powerful was trying to speak to you? And all you had to do was listen? I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to tell you to light up and zone out. What I'm about to share is a memory, a warning, and an invitation. I was like you, conservative in my ways, skeptical of anything that sounded like spiritual fluff. My feet were planted firmly on the ground. I smoked to relax, nothing more, until one night, everything changed. I remember the chair I was sitting in. Brown leather, worn soft with age, the same chair I used to rock my daughter in when she was a baby. I took a small puff. One, not much, just enough to loosen the evening stiffness from my shoulders. But this time, something was different. As I closed my eyes, I felt a lifting, a rising, as if my mind detached gently from my body and hovered just above it. I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't asleep. I saw colors, vivid, alive, colors that don't exist on this earth. And then I heard a voice. Not loud, not frightening, just a whisper. You've been asleep, now wake up. I don't remember inhaling again. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, not in fear but in awe. That moment split my life in two, before and after. I started reading everything I could find. The Vedas, 5,000-year-old spiritual texts, called cannabis, Vajja, the conqueror of suffering. Egyptian tablets described it as the green messenger. Even the Bible spoke of a holy anointing oil, made with a plant that modern scholars now believe was cannabis. So how did we go from sacred medicine to forbidden vice? Somewhere along the line, they needed to control the mind, not liberate it. A liberated mind asks questions. A liberated mind doesn't obey blindly. You've lived long enough to know how that story goes. But this isn't just about history. This is about tonight, about you. Because whether you've never touched the stuff or left it behind decades ago, the invitation is the same. The plant is still waiting, not to make you forget your life, but to help you remember a part of it that got buried under bills, losses, pride, and practicality. That small voice inside, the one you heard more clearly when you were young, the one that whispered through long walks, through still nights, through those moments when everything just felt connected. That voice never left, it just got drowned out. Cannabis doesn't create it, it clears the static so you can finally hear it again. But don't get me wrong, this isn't about grabbing a joint and getting silly. That's not what the ancients did. That's not what I did, either. What changed my life was a different kind of ritual, one older than any religion. A ritual of silence, breath, intention. I sat down, I turned off the lights. I asked, with my hand over my heart, what do I need to understand? I didn't ask to be entertained. I didn't ask to escape. I asked to see, and I did, not with my eyes, with something else, something older. You see, cannabis doesn't give you visions. It removes the blinders. It turns the dial of your awareness so you can tune in to what was already playing, frequencies of thought, feeling, and insight that were always there but hidden beneath noise. And when you approach it with reverence, something strange happens. The nonsense fades, the clarity comes. It's like walking into a room you didn't know existed in your own house. A room filled with old memories, truths you buried, and gifts you forgot to unwrap. I know some of you are shaking your heads. I would have too, not long ago. You've lived long enough to trust only what you can touch, measure, prove, but let me ask you, how many of the most meaningful things in your life were measurable? Love, regret, joy, sorrow, faith. Did you ever need a ruler to know your heart was breaking? Did you ever need a graph to feel your soul lift when your child took their first step? This is no different. The map may be invisible, but the territory is real. And that's why I'm telling you this. Because no one told me. And I think someone should have. Not to convince me to smoke, but to open a door I didn't know was there. Not every man walks through it. Not every man is ready. But if you're still reading, still listening, maybe you are. Maybe you've reached a point in life where you're less interested in opinions and more interested in truth. Maybe you feel the subtle ache of knowing there's more to life than news headlines, prescription pills, and holiday dinners where everyone's too tired to talk about anything real. Maybe, just maybe, you're ready to remember. Remember what it felt like to be fully alive. Remember what it felt like to know something bigger than yourself was guiding you. Remember what it felt like to trust your own intuition, even when the world told you not to. This isn't about rebellion. This is about reunion. Reunion with the part of you that the noise of life tried to bury. The part that knew, long before words, that you were connected to something vast and mysterious. The part that didn't need proof because it was the proof. Tonight, if you're brave enough, try something different. Sit in silence. No TV, no phone, just you, your breath, your heartbeat. And if you choose to partake, mindfully, sparingly, do it not as a user, but as a seeker. Ask the plant what it wants to show you. Ask yourself what you've forgotten. Listen with more than ears. You might be surprised what you hear. Because here's the thing, at your age, you don't need entertainment, you need reconnection. And that's what this plant offers, not escape, but entry. Entry back into yourself, not the man they said you should be. Not the titles, the roles, the masks, just you, the real you, the one who still wonders, the one who still listens for God in the wind, the one who still hopes, in secret, that it's not too late to feel fully alive again. It's not too late, you're not too old, and the story isn't over. You're just now reaching the chapter they never wanted you to read. Welcome to it. Let's keep going. You'd think a man past 60 would have already seen the world for what it is. That by now, you'd have it all figured out, the games people play, the lies we swallow, the half-truths dressed up as gospel. But something about that moment, when I sat still and felt the world peel back like old wallpaper, made me realize we've been living in a house of illusions. And most men, especially our age, never get past the foyer. They stop asking questions once the job is done. The kids are grown, the lawn is mowed, but just because your knees ache and the nights are quieter doesn't mean the truth has stopped knocking. In fact, it's knocking louder than ever. The older you get, the fewer distractions you have to drown it out. After that first experience, that first awakening, I couldn't just go back to who I was. Not because I suddenly believed in magic or wanted to join some fringe group of New Age thinkers. No, it was because for the first time in decades, I felt something stir in me that had long gone silent. I felt wonder, and let me tell you something most folks won't admit. As you get older, you don't just miss your youth, you miss wonder. You miss waking up and feeling like the day might surprise you. You miss the sense that there's more to this world than bills, pills, and TV reruns. And that night, cannabis didn't just relax me. It cracked something open, like a rusted hinge on a door I hadn't touched since my 20s. Now I wasn't foolish. I didn't go around preaching or turning every conversation into a sermon about sacred plants. But I was curious, and if you know anything about a man in his 60s who suddenly gets curious again, you'll know that nothing can stop him from digging. I went back to the books, not the ones they fed us in school, but the ones that smelled like dust and rebellion. I read about the Emerald Tablets, ancient texts they say were written by Thoth himself. Whether you believe that or not doesn't really matter. What matters is what the words do to you, what they unlock. And brother, those words lit something up in me that I didn't even know was still wired for power. They spoke of balance, of seeing beyond the veil, of understanding that reality isn't just what your five senses tell you. And the plant, they said, wasn't a crutch or a party favor, it was a key. Not to some fantasy land, but to the deeper layers of what already is. It made me think of the times I'd looked into my wife's eyes and felt something ancient pass between us. something no language could catch. Or when I stood alone in the woods and the wind seemed to whisper my name like it knew me. Those moments weren't imagination, they were glimpses, and I realized I'd spent most of my life brushing them aside. Telling myself to be practical, to be realistic, to grow up, but what if growing up didn't mean shutting down? What if it meant finally being brave enough to listen? I started experimenting, not recklessly, but ritually, not more, but less, and always with intention. That's the word they never taught us growing up. Intention. We were taught to act, to achieve, to produce, but no one told us how to intend. No one told us that intention isn't just thinking ahead, it's aligning your soul with your actions. So before each session, I'd sit with my hand over my chest like before, and I'd ask a new question each time. Not a big dramatic one, something honest, something ordinary. What am I still holding on to? What part of me needs forgiveness? Where have I grown bitter without knowing it? And let me tell you something you won't hear from any TV doctor or politician. When you ask sincerely, the plant answers, not with words, but with memories, feelings, flashes of insight. Sometimes I'd remember something from childhood, a moment with my father I'd buried so deep I thought it was gone. Sometimes I'd feel a wave of sadness wash over me and realize it wasn't mine, it was my mother's. I had carried it, unknowingly, for years. One night, the vision came clearer than ever. I saw myself as a boy, maybe 8 years old, standing barefoot in the yard behind my childhood home. It was autumn, I could feel the dry leaves under my feet. My father was there, sitting on the porch, watching me in silence, and I knew, without anyone saying a word, that he didn't know how to love me the way I needed. Not because he didn't care, but because no one had ever loved him that way. The ache in my chest wasn't bitterness. It was understanding, and that understanding, that forgiveness I felt in that moment, it didn't come from therapy. It didn't come from years of reflection. It came because I was finally quiet enough to hear it. That's what this practice is. Not a shortcut to enlightenment. Just a quieting of the noise so you can hear what's been calling you all along. I also started noticing changes during the day. Subtle at first. I'd walk outside and the sky seemed more blue. If that makes sense. The way my coffee tasted in the morning, it felt deeper, richer. Conversations with old friends became less surface level. I started listening more, really listening, not just waiting for my turn to talk. And they noticed. My wife told me I seemed lighter. My daughter asked if I was doing yoga or something. I laughed and told her I was just trying to be present. But the truth was, I was being reintroduced to myself, the self I had before the job titles. Before the responsibilities stacked up like bricks on my back. I wasn't chasing youth, I was reclaiming presence. But here's the thing they don't tell you. Once you start this path, you can't unsee. You can't pretend the old way is enough anymore. The beer at the end of the day doesn't hit the same. The news on TV sounds even more ridiculous. The small talk at the store feels even smaller. You start craving something real. And sometimes that's lonely, especially when your peers just want to complain about politics or knee pain. But then, every once in a while, you meet someone who's waking up too. Maybe they don't talk about it the same way. Maybe they found it through loss, or music, or silence, but you can see it in their eyes, that glint of recognition. Like they've seen the edge of the map and realized it doesn't end there. I'm not here to hand you a doctrine or convert you to anything. I'm just telling you what happened when I stopped dismissing the thing they told me to fear. When I started treating it not as a vice but as a vessel. And I know that language might sound strange, especially if you spent a lifetime being told cannabis was for criminals or slackers. But ask yourself this: who benefits from you staying numb, distracted, suspicious of your own instincts? Who benefits from you not remembering that you have receptors in your brain specifically designed for this plant? That your body recognizes it not as foreign, but as familiar? They've fed us fear for decades. They painted images of madness and laziness. But they never told us the full truth. They never said that cannabis was revered by saints, monks, and healers, that it was burned in temples and brewed into sacred oils, that it's been a bridge between worlds for longer than the Bible has existed. Why? Because a man connected to himself is dangerous. He stops obeying nonsense. He stops being easy to manipulate. He starts asking uncomfortable questions. So I'll ask you again, when was the last time you felt wonder? Not amusement, not comfort, wonder, that quiet awe that makes the hair on your arms stand up. That sense that you are part of something vast and intelligent and good. If it's been too long, maybe it's time to listen. Not to me, not even to the plant, but to yourself, the self that never stopped believing. The self that remembers what it felt like to be alive and whole and unafraid. That version of you is still in there, waiting, not for the world to change, but for you to come home. Let's keep going. There's a strange thing that happens when a man begins to truly listen, not just with his ears, but with that deeper sense that's been dormant for too long. At first, it's unsettling. You start to notice things you used to brush off. The way your breath feels shallow when you lie to yourself. The way your shoulders tense up when you pretend to agree just to keep the peace. You begin to recognize how much of your life was spent in reaction, saying yes when you wanted to say no, laughing when something wasn't funny, nodding when your soul was screaming. And when that veil lifts, you can't go back to pretending. That's what no one tells you. Awakening isn't some euphoric escape, it's a call to come clean with your own damn self. And brother, it's the hardest, most necessary thing a man can do in the second half of his life. After those first few nights of intentional use, when the visions started coming not as fantasies but as mirrors, I realized this plant wasn't giving me answers. It was showing me where I had stopped asking the right questions. One evening I sat down with the usual ritual, dim lights, hand over heart, no distractions, and I asked something I had never dared to ask before. What part of me have I ignored the longest? I expected a flash of childhood memory, maybe something to do with my father again, but what came instead was silence. And in that silence, I saw a younger version of myself, maybe 40, maybe younger, sitting at the dinner table, smiling wide for everyone, holding court like I always did. But behind the eyes, there was nothing, no joy, no ease, just effort. It hit me hard. I hadn't just ignored my emotions. I had built an entire identity to hide from them. And it wasn't just about the past. I began to see how even now, I still slipped into the roles people expected of me. The wise elder, the reliable man, the one who keeps it together while others fall apart. But beneath that image, I was still craving something raw, something unfiltered, not drama, not chaos, just truth, the kind of truth that doesn't need approval, the kind that makes you sit up straighter, not because someone's watching, but because your soul demands it. That night I didn't get high. I got real, and that realness, it's like fire. It'll burn away your excuses, your blame, your old stories, but it'll also keep you warm in a way that nothing else can. I started paying more attention to my dreams. Not the wild ones with flying or falling, those are noise. I'm talking about the quiet ones. The ones where someone you haven't seen in years just looks at you. The ones where a single sentence sticks with you all day. One night I dreamed I was walking through my old high school. Everything looked the same but felt different. The lockers were still dented. The hallway still smelled like sweat and floor wax. But it was me who was different. I wasn't nervous or invisible like I was back then. I walked with purpose. And when I turned the corner, I saw my old self, 16 years old, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, that familiar fake toughness on his face. I didn't say a word. I just walked up to him, put a hand on his shoulder, and nodded. He nodded back. I woke up in tears. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in decades, I felt like I had forgiven that kid for trying so damn hard to survive. That's what this plant does when you treat it with reverence. It doesn't hand you enlightenment on a silver platter. It gives you a shovel and points to the places you've buried yourself. It says, dig here, and you do, not because you enjoy the dirt, but because you're ready to grow something real. I began to wonder how many other men like me were carrying entire lifetimes of unspoken grief. How many of us had survived wars, layoffs, divorces, betrayals, sometimes all of them, and never once paused to feel it? We just kept moving. We did what men are told to do. We handled it. We became dependable, stoic, polite shells, but no one taught us how to heal. No one said it was okay to unravel in a safe space. We were taught to soldier on. And now, here we are, 60 plus, with our armor rusted into our skin, barely able to breathe beneath it. But what if healing doesn't mean falling apart? What if it means falling into yourself? What if it's not about weakness, but wisdom? That's the word that kept echoing through me, wisdom. Not the kind that comes from books or even experience, but the kind that comes from making peace with the parts of yourself that were never allowed to speak. The kind of wisdom that says, you are more than what you've done. You are more than what you've lost. I remember one afternoon I took a walk in the woods near my home. Nothing special, just a slow stroll. The trees were tall and still. The air cool and quiet. I'd smoked earlier that morning, just a little. Not enough to cloud things. Just enough to clear them. And as I walked, I felt this strange sense of time bending. Like I was walking not just in space, but in memory. I could hear my old boots crunching the path like I'd been there before. But the emotion was new, deep peace. And I realized, with a kind of quiet awe, that I wasn't chasing youth anymore. I was finally settling into my elderhood. Not the kind that sits silently on the porch and fades, but the kind that radiates. The kind that holds space for others. Not by talking louder, but by listening deeper. That's when I began exploring the idea that this plant might be not just a guide, but a teacher of presence. Not philosophy, not escape, but embodiment. It teaches you to feel what you've numbed, to slow down in a world obsessed with speed, to reconnect with what's sacred, not in temples or cathedrals, but in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the way your hands feel against your chest when you remember who you are. Some nights I light a candle before I begin, not because I'm religious, but because ritual matters, intention matters. It tells the nervous system, we're safe here, and when the high comes, it's not loud or dizzying. It's soft, like fog rolling through an old forest. It wraps around your thoughts and pulls you deeper into yourself. Not to escape, but to see, to truly see. And what you see, well, that depends on what you're ready to know. One night I saw my wife, not as she is now, but as she was when we first met. That nervous smile, those firecracker eyes, and I realized how long it had been since I looked at her that way. How easy it is to forget the magic in the familiar. When the vision faded, I sat in the dark for nearly an hour, just remembering, and when she came home from her book club, I hugged her like it was the first time. I didn't need to explain. She felt it. That's the power of presence. It needs no translation. The older we get, the more we lose people. Friends die, families drift, and you start to feel like you're living in echoes. But what if those echoes are invitations? What if every memory that rises is a doorway to healing, not a weight to carry? Cannabis doesn't bring the dead back, but it does bring the lessons they left behind. And it shows you that you're not alone. Not truly. The soul remembers. The heart keeps score in ways we can't measure. And when you create space, it speaks. So here's where I leave you tonight, not with advice, not with answers, just with this. What part of you is still waiting to be seen? Not judged, not fixed, just seen. Sit with that, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Light a candle, breathe deep. And if you choose to walk with the plant, do it like a man who's earned his scars. With reverence, with curiosity, with the quiet courage to feel again. Let's keep going. It was a Thursday morning, early enough that the neighborhood was still asleep, but late enough for the robins to be loud about it. I was on my porch with a cup of black coffee and no distractions. Just me, the trees, and the kind of quiet that feels sacred if you let it. I hadn't smoked that morning. Sometimes I don't. That's something people get wrong about cannabis. It's not supposed to be constant. It's supposed to be a conversation, not a monologue, and every now and then, you let silence do the talking. I sat there watching the sun reach over the rooftops like an old friend coming by unannounced. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, contentment without condition. I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't remembering the past or planning the future. I was simply there, and it hit me like a quiet thunder. This is what we spent decades overlooking. Not peace through escape, but peace through presence. That presence didn't come easy. It's been earned. You don't stumble into that kind of stillness when your whole life's been built on proving, fixing, surviving. No, it shows up after you've cracked open a few hard truths. After you've buried some pride. After you've stopped pretending to have all the answers. I'd been walking with the plant for months by now, never abusing it. Always respecting it, and in return, it kept unfolding these layers inside me like a slow burning revelation. What began as curiosity had turned into discipline, and what once felt like a tool had become something closer to a sacred partnership. And not sacred in the dramatic, overblown sense, sacred in the way a deep breath is sacred, sacred in the way a real hug is sacred, quiet, grounded, honest. One night, not long after that porch morning, I tried something different. I remembered reading about how ancient cultures paired cannabis with sound, not music as entertainment, but sound as intention. So I pulled out an old speaker and played a recording of low, steady chanting, just one tone, over and over, deep enough to feel in the ribs. I took one small puff, just enough to ease me into that liminal place where thought becomes feeling. And then I lay down on the rug in the living room and listened. Nothing happened for a while, and I didn't expect it to. But then, somewhere between the thump of my heartbeat and the echo of that tone, I felt this wave of clarity move through me. Not a vision, not a high, just understanding. I realized I'd been carrying grief that didn't belong to me. Generational stuff. My grandfather's silence. My father's temper. The way we men pass down pain like family recipes without even realizing it. We don't talk about those inheritances. We just carry them in our shoulders. In our clenched jaws. In the way we swallow our emotions like bitter pills. And that night, lying there on the floor, I saw how those things had shaped me, not just the pain itself, but my resistance to it. All those years of holding it in to look strong, to appear stable, to be the man everyone expected. But here's the twist no one tells you. That pain you bury doesn't disappear. It mutates. It turns into sarcasm, or judgment, or shame, and the world rewards you for hiding it. They call you tough. They call you stoic. But deep down, you know you've just been surviving, not living. That night wasn't about letting go of the pain. It was about letting it speak. And that was enough. Because when you give the wound a voice, it stops screaming for your attention. I didn't cry that night. I breathed, long, steady breaths, like my body was remembering how to be gentle with itself. And for a man in his 60s, that's not small, that's revolution. The days after that felt different, more grounded, more intentional. I started moving slower, not because of age, but because of choice. I paid attention to how I poured my coffee, how I spoke to my wife, how I listened to my body when it said, rest now. I even started keeping a small notebook, not for goals, but for insights, little things the plant would whisper or the silence would reveal. One day, I wrote, what if forgiveness isn't something you give, but something you return to? Another day, maybe peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. These weren't epiphanies, they were reminders, pieces of wisdom that had always been there, waiting for the noise to settle. Then came the question I'd been avoiding. Was I willing to share this journey with others? Not preach it, not promote it, just live it out loud. That's a different kind of courage. We're trained, as men, especially at this age, to keep the spiritual stuff private. Show too much softness and you risk losing respect. But I was tired of pretending. I didn't want to be the guy who only opened up behind closed doors or after 2 drinks. I wanted to be a whole man, not just a respected one. And so I started speaking differently. With my old friends, I stopped dodging the deep topics. I let them see the changes. Some got it, some didn't. That's all right. Everyone wakes up at their own pace. But the most surprising thing? A few of them pulled me aside later, eyes a little glassy, voices a little quieter, and said, I've been feeling something too. That's how it starts, not with declarations, but with resonance. One honest man gives another permission. One candle lights the next. And soon, the dark doesn't feel so endless. A few weeks later, I tried a ritual I read about from the Huichol people of Mexico. They place a bowl of salt nearby during ceremonies, believing it helps ground the body when visions become too intense. I didn't expect anything dramatic, but I followed the ritual out of respect. This time, I sat outside under the stars. No music, no journal, just me, the night, and a pinch of salt beside me like an old protector. After a small puff, I let my thoughts drift. The stars looked different, not brighter, clearer, like they weren't just dots of light but openings, doorways. And as I sat there, I felt something shift in my chest. A weight I hadn't even realized was there began to lift. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, like an old friend putting a hand on your shoulder. Not to say goodbye, but to say, it's time. That time wasn't about quitting cannabis or chasing some higher state. It was about integration, about bringing what I'd learned into my daily life, into how I listen, into how I speak, into how I forgive, because what good is a spiritual experience if it doesn't make you a better man to the people around you? So I started doing something small but powerful. Every morning, before I got out of bed, I'd ask myself one question. What kind of man do I want to be today? Not what do I want to achieve, not what do I need to fix. Just, who do I want to be? And let me tell you, when you start your day with being instead of doing, the whole damn world shifts. Your coffee tastes better, your conversations go deeper, even your aches and pains start to feel less like curses and more like reminders that you're still here. Still in the game. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't about a plant anymore. It's about coming home, not to some house or place or identity, but to your own skin. Your own breath, your own presence. Cannabis was never the destination. It was the knock on the door. And now that you've opened it, the question becomes, what kind of life are you willing to live on the other side? The plant showed me that aging isn't about decline. It's about refinement, like distilling whiskey, or polishing wood, you don't lose your edge, you sharpen your truth. You strip away what doesn't serve. And you stand taller, not because of ego, but because you finally know who the hell you are. You're not just a husband or a father or a veteran or a retiree. You are a living library. A soul with decades of experience. Pain, joy, failure, redemption, and now, finally, you've got the space to feel it all. Don't waste it numbing out. Don't waste it pretending you've got nothing left to learn. Let the questions come. Let the quiet reveal you. Let the medicine, whether plant or breath or stillness, show you what you've forgotten. You're not broken. You're ripening. You're not fading. You're blooming in reverse. Let's keep going. You reach a certain point in life when silence starts speaking louder than noise ever did. It's not just the quiet of a slower house or fewer calls coming in. It's an inner quiet, the kind that shows up once the dust of ambition settles. Once the roles you've played stop demanding your full attention. For years you wore the armor of usefulness, of responsibility, of being the one others leaned on. But now, sitting here with your morning coffee, no meetings on the calendar, no small children to wake up or business to build, you begin to feel something you never expected, a sacred invitation. Not from the world, but from within, a whisper that says, now we begin. You'd think after 6 decades of living, you'd be done with beginnings. But the truth is, most of us never really started. We were raised to react, to build, to perform. We were handed blueprints instead of questions. We were told to succeed, but rarely to reflect. And when the reflection came, if it came, it was often too late. Buried under shame or confusion. But now, with space carved out by time itself, you have the rare opportunity to look at your life from the inside out. Not to judge it, not to rewrite it, but to understand it, and there, in that understanding, lies the key to something far more valuable than youth, freedom. That's what this plant has been trying to teach me, not the freedom of escape or rebellion, but the freedom of truth, the kind that doesn't require applause, the kind that doesn't make excuses. It simply is. After all the rituals, the breathing, the slow uncovering of emotional debris, I began to notice something subtle but powerful. The effects of the plant were becoming less external and more internal. I didn't need the visions anymore. I didn't crave the waves of clarity. Instead, I started carrying them, like muscle memory, like an old song you can hum without even thinking. And that, I realized, was the goal all along, not to depend on the plant, but to absorb its wisdom into my bones. I started waking up with that sense of presence I used to have to work hard for. Even on days I didn't smoke, I could feel the residue of all those intentional sessions sitting quietly in my chest like a familiar rhythm. When I looked at my wife, I didn't just see her, I felt her essence. The history between us, the silent understanding we'd built like a bridge over time. When I walked past strangers in the grocery store, I felt less separate from them, less like an old man among strangers, more like a human among humans. That's what the plant had opened in me, a reawakened connection. Not cosmic or mystical, just deeply, achingly real. But here's the part one didn't expect. There came a night when I took my usual puff, sat down for my evening meditation, and nothing happened. No shift, no insight, just stillness. At first, I thought maybe the batch was weak, maybe I hadn't smoked enough. But the next night, the same thing happened, and the night after that. Then it hit me. The plant wasn't failing me. It was releasing me, like a teacher who knows when to stop giving lessons. I remembered something I'd read once: when the student is ready, the medicine retreats. And that's exactly what it felt like. At first, I felt a sense of loss. I'd grown to appreciate the ritual, the gentle buzz, the open channel of reflection it provided. But then I asked myself, what if this is the next lesson? What if the plant had served its purpose? What if it was now my turn to carry the torch on my own? Not because I had outgrown it, but because I had integrated it. That word kept coming up: integration. Not enlightenment, not transformation, just the quiet stitching of truth into daily life. I started focusing more on breathwork, on movement, on nourishing my body in ways I'd ignored for years. I swapped the late-night puff for a glass of warm tea and some journaling. And what surprised me most was this: the clarity stayed. That's when I understood what real spiritual maturity looks like. It's not about how often you meditate or how many rituals you perform. It's about who you become in the absence of those tools. Can you remain grounded when the high fades? Can you stay connected when the visions stop? Can you embody the wisdom without the ceremony? These are the questions the plant left me with. And as hard as they were to face, they also felt like a A final blessing from an old friend who knew it was time for me to walk alone. One evening, I pulled out my old photo albums. Not to reminisce, but to witness. I looked at the young man I used to be, the one with too much pride and too little patience. The one who thought vulnerability was weakness. And I smiled, not with pity, but with forgiveness. I looked at the pictures of my children when they were small. And instead of feeling regret for time lost, I felt immense gratitude for the love we did share, the lessons we all survived together. I saw my life not as a series of mistakes or triumphs, but as a living poem, messy, beautiful, unfinished. And that's when it occurred to me, the final phase of this journey isn't about discovery. It's about returning to the body, to the breath, to the man beneath the armor, the one who never needed to prove his worth, only to remember it. I began to create small rituals of presence throughout the day, lighting a candle before dinner, sitting in silence after a phone call, placing my hand on my heart before I spoke, just to check in. These weren't spiritual tricks, they were acts of self-respect. They were me saying, I matter enough to be here for this moment. And that's what I want to leave you with. If you're still here reading this, your presence matters, not just to others, but to you. You may be 60, 70, even 80. That doesn't mean your journey is winding down. It might just be widening. The world will keep telling you that your best days are behind you, that you should sit back, fade out, become background noise. But I'm telling you, your voice still matters. Your being still matters. And the lessons you've gathered, if honored and shared, can ripple out further than you'll ever know. You don't need to climb mountains or chase altered states to be wise. You just need to remember. Remember the sacredness of stillness. Remember the power of listening. Remember that the teacher was never the plant, or the practice, or the ritual. The teacher was always the part of you willing to receive. The quiet one who waited patiently behind the noise of life. The one who's awake now. So take this moment, breathe it in, feel your feet on the ground, your lungs expanding, your heart beating steady. You've walked through fire, you've weathered storms, and you're still here, not just alive, but awakening. Don't wait for permission, don't wait for perfection. The next chapter begins the moment you choose to live it fully. No plant required, just your presence, just your truth, and a heart brave enough to carry it. Let's keep going.